It was a day like any other, or so I thought. I had spent weeks preparing for this. My husband's birthday. The one day of the year that I could show him just how much he meant to me. The one day where I would be the perfect wife and everything would go according to plan. But that day, it would turn out to be the start of something I could never have predicted. My name is Margaret Grayson. I'm 82 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and at least I thought, a devoted wife. I've been married to Harold for 60 years. We've had our ups and downs, of course. Every marriage does. But I had always believed in the vow I made to him, through thick and thin. I had sacrificed so much over the years, putting him and his needs first. The kids were raised. The house was perfect. I had always stood by him. Always. That morning I woke up early, just as the sun was creeping through the window. I started preparing breakfast like I always did, with a familiar smell of fresh coffee and scrambled eggs filling the kitchen. I hummed as I cracked eggs, remembering when I first met Harold. How charming he was, how he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. I smiled at the thought of it. The day went by in a blur of frantic preparations. I wanted everything to be perfect. The decorations, the cake, the champagne. I had invited all of his friends, even the ones I wasn't particularly fond of. I thought maybe today I could make him feel special, feel appreciated for once. It had been a while since he'd shown any real affection towards me. Lately he seemed distant, always on his phone, never engaging with me the way he used to. But I pushed those thoughts aside. Today was about him. The evening arrived. Guests trickled in, and the house began to fill with chatter and laughter. I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest as I saw Harold's face light up when he saw the surprise party I'd planned. He seemed genuinely touched, and for a moment I thought this might be the moment we both needed. A fresh start. But then, as the night wore on, something felt off. The air felt thick with anticipation, like there was a secret hanging in the room that no one was brave enough to speak. Harold had been acting strangely. He kept looking at his watch, stepping away for phone calls, and speaking in hushed tones with his friends. It wasn't unusual for him to be busy with work, but tonight felt different. Finally the moment came, the birthday toast. Everyone gathered around Harold, glasses raised in celebration. He stood at the head of the table, smiling, his face slightly flushed from the wine. But there was something in his eyes. Something I couldn't place. A glint of excitement, maybe, or was it guilt? He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," Harold began. "This has been a wonderful night, and I want to take a moment to thank someone very special to me. I don't say it enough, but I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, for our family." My heart swelled with pride. He was finally acknowledging me. Thought to myself, this is it. This is the moment where I'll feel loved again. "And of course," he continued, "I'd like to give a special thank you to someone who's made this all possible tonight." He looked around the room before his eyes landed on her. A woman I didn't recognize. She stood near the edge of the room, dressed in a tight red dress, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. I watched in disbelief as Harold stepped towards her, his hand extended. "Let's give her a round of applause, shall we?" He grinned, his voice carrying through the room. "Thank you, Lila, for making everything happen tonight." Lila. Who was Lila? The room burst into applause, but all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. My body went cold. I felt the floor beneath me shift. This was not happening. Not in front of me. Not at my husband's birthday party. I stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. My husband had thanked another woman. A woman I didn't know, a woman who had no place in our lives. And then, as if to rub salt in the wound, he handed me a present, a gift that I wasn't prepared for. It was a brand new t-shirt, fresh from the packaging, the logo bold and clear. It read, "Divorced." The laughter from his friends filled the air, but I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I felt my stomach drop as I looked around at the people who had once been my friends too. They laughed along with Harold, as if this was a joke, as if I was some sort of punchline. And in that moment everything became clear. This wasn't my party. This wasn't a celebration of my husband's life or our years together. It was a public humiliation. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the t-shirt, the laughter still echoing in my ears. I felt the tears well up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I turned on my heel without a word and walked out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. And just as the door closed behind me, I knew what I had to do. Harold had made his choice. He thought he could embarrass me, humiliate me in front of everyone. But I wasn't going to let this stand. I went straight to the garage, grabbed the gift I had so carefully chosen for him, the one I had spent hours picking out. It was a rare vintage watch, something I thought he'd love. I didn't even look at the address. I just wrapped it, and with a calm, steady hand, I returned to the party. I walked straight back into the room, my eyes burning with fury. The moment Harold saw me, his face drained of color. His friends stopped laughing. The noise in the room died down. And in one swift motion, I handed him back his gift. "I'm returning this, Harold," I said, my voice steady. "You don't deserve it." The room fell into complete silence. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned, walking towards the door, and heard the sound of my heels echoing through the house. And just as I was about to leave, Harold called after me. "You can't leave like this. This is a misunderstanding." But I didn't turn back. I didn't need to hear another word. The man I had spent my life with, the one I had loved, was gone. And I was done. But what happened next? That, my friends, would shock even Harold himself. The door slammed shut behind me, but I didn't hear it. The world outside felt distant, as if I had just stepped into another reality. I wasn't sure what was happening to me. My body felt numb, like I was floating above myself, looking down at the woman who had just walked out on her husband's birthday party, on everything she had worked so hard to create. I stood outside the house, breathing in the cool night air, trying to calm my racing heart. My hands were trembling, and the tears that I had fought so hard to hold back finally began to fall, but I didn't make a sound. I didn't want to let anyone hear me cry. The events of the night were too surreal. I could hardly wrap my head around it. Layla. Who was she? Why hadn't Harold told me about her? I had spent months planning this party, every little detail designed to make him feel special. I didn't know what was more painful, the fact that he had humiliated me, or that he didn't even have the decency to keep it a secret. I walked down the driveway, the heels of my shoes clicking against the pavement with each step. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. For the first time in years, I realized that I had been living in a fog. I had been so focused on keeping up appearances, so wrapped up in keeping the family together, that I had ignored the signs. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the way he looked at me, no longer with affection but with indifference. But tonight had been the final straw. He had chosen someone else, and he made sure I knew it in front of everyone. As I walked down the street, I tried to clear my mind. The cool night air felt like a slap in the face, but it didn't make me feel alive. Didn't help me think straight. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Froze. It was a text from my daughter, Emily. "Mom, are you okay? What happened in there?" I stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how to respond. I wanted to tell her everything, but I knew that doing so would just pull her into the mess that had been my marriage. I had shielded her from this for so long. She had no idea what was really going on between Harold and me. I couldn't bring myself to put that weight on her shoulders. So I typed out a simple message. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just need some space right now. Don't worry about me." I hit send, slipping the phone back into my pocket. The words didn't feel like mine. They felt like a lie. But I wasn't ready to face anyone, not yet. I kept walking, letting my feet guide me with no particular destination in mind. I was lost in my thoughts, replaying the events of the night over and over again. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. By the time I realized where I had walked, I found myself standing in front of a small, old diner on the corner of Elm Street. It was the kind of place that didn't change, no matter how many years went by. The neon sign flickered, casting a faint red glow over the sidewalk. Without thinking, I walked inside. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and the smell of greasy food and stale coffee hit me. The diner was empty, except for a couple sitting in a booth in the back. The waitress behind the counter gave me a nod, but I didn't return it. I just sat down at the bar and placed my purse on the counter. "What can I get you, hon?" the waitress asked with a polite smile. I looked at the menu, not really seeing it. "Just coffee," I said, my voice hoarse. She nodded, turning to brew a fresh pot. I rested my elbows on the counter, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. My blonde hair was starting to fall out of its carefully styled updo, and I felt so tired. I wasn't just physically tired. I was emotionally drained. How did we get here? The question kept running through my mind. I had spent so many years loving him, so many years supporting him. And this is how it ended. With him publicly humiliating me in front of his friends. I felt the tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I quickly blinked them away. Well, I wasn't going to cry over this. I wasn't going to give him that power over me anymore. The waitress brought over my coffee, and I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into my frozen fingers. It was a small comfort, but it was enough. For the first time all night, I could feel my body begin to relax. But just as I was starting to gather my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. This time it was from Harold. "Margaret, where are you? We need to talk. Please don't do anything crazy." I stared at the text. Crazy. He had humiliated me in front of everyone, and now he was worried about me doing something crazy. I was about to respond, but then I stopped myself. This wasn't the time for a conversation. Not yet. He needed to feel the consequences of his actions. I set my phone down on the counter, my eyes hardening. I wasn't going to let him have the upper hand. Not anymore. I stood up, leaving a few bills on the counter for the coffee, and walked out of the diner. As I made my way back home, a sense of determination settled over me. Harold had made his choice, but so had I. And now it was my turn to act. What I would do next? Well, that would shock him. As I walked back to the house, the streets seemed quieter, almost eerily so. It was as if the world itself had stopped to watch my next move. Harold had no idea what he had just set in motion. I could feel the cool night air brush against my skin, but it did nothing to calm the fire that was burning inside me. The moment I had stepped out of that party, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to sit by and let him get away with this. He had crossed a line, and I would make sure he understood the gravity of his actions. By the time I reached the front door, I knew I couldn't walk back into the house just yet. Not after everything that had happened. I glanced up at the window, where the faint glow of light from inside suggested that Harold was still awake. He was probably waiting for me, thinking I'd come crawling back, ready to beg for his forgiveness. Not this time. Not anymore. I paced in front of the door for a moment, debating what to do. Then, without another thought, I made my way around to the side of the house and opened the small gate that led into the backyard. I had a plan, and it was time to put it into motion. The backyard was quiet, the only sound being the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. I walked over to the shed near the far corner of the yard, where I had kept a few things hidden away over the years. There, buried beneath a pile of old gardening tools and crates, I found what I was looking for. A small, locked box. It had been my father's, and I had kept it hidden for years. I hadn't told Harold about it, not because I didn't trust him, but because it was something that was mine and mine alone. I unlocked the box, revealing a collection of documents, old photographs, and, most importantly, my legal papers. The ones that Harold had never known about. One by one, I flipped through the papers, each one more significant than the last. There were property deeds, bank statements, and, most crucially, a copy of my will. I had written it years ago, back when I thought Harold and I were invincible. back when I believed that we would grow old together side by side. But the truth was, I had always known that something wasn't right. I had always suspected that Harold had secrets. And now I had proof. My hands trembled as I held the will, staring down at the words I had written. They were clear, concise, and, most importantly, written with the intent to protect myself. It was a plan, a backup in case things ever went wrong. And now I was going to put it into action. I closed the box, locking it once more, and stood up. My heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something else. Something stronger. I was done being the victim. As I made my way back to the front of the house, I heard the sound of the front door creak open. Harold's voice floated out into the night air, calling my name. "Margaret," he said softly, his voice filled with concern. "Where are you?" I took a deep breath, then walked toward the door with steady steps, each one carrying me closer to the moment I had been waiting for. When I entered the house, Harold was standing in the hallway, looking anxious. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, as if ready to apologize. But there would be no apologies. Not from him. Not anymore. I walked right past him without a word, heading straight for the living room. Harold followed me, his footsteps quickening as he tried to catch up. "Margaret, please. Let's talk about this," he pleaded. I turned to face him, my expression cold and resolute. "No, Harold," I said firmly. "It's too late for that." His eyes widened in surprise, but before he could respond, I reached into my purse and pulled out the small envelope that had been tucked away inside. Harold's face shifted from confusion to a slight frown as he looked at the envelope. "What's this?" he asked, his voice tinged with impatience. I walked up to him and handed him the envelope, my gaze unwavering. "Open it," I told him. "You need to see what's inside." He hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure of what to expect, but then he tore open the envelope and pulled out the contents. His expression faltered as he looked down at the paper inside. It was a copy of the will, the one that I had kept hidden for all these years. "What the hell is this?" Harold muttered under his breath as he read the document. "You don't get to decide anymore," I said coldly. "Not after everything you've done. Not after tonight." I watched his face change, his eyes narrowing as he processed the words on the page. He looked at me, then back at the will, his mouth slightly agape. You're leaving me everything?" he asked, his voice disbelieving. I nodded slowly, watching him with a calm that I didn't know I had. "You've already taken everything from me. It's time I take back what's mine." Harold's expression shifted from confusion to anger, his jaw tightening as the realization hit him. He threw the will down on the coffee table, his eyes flashing with fury. "You can't be serious," he snapped. "This is mine. You can't do this to me." I took a step closer, not backing down. "I've spent my whole life supporting you, putting you first, and this is how you repay me. You humiliate me in front of your friends. You choose someone else over me." I shook my head, disappointment written all over my face. "No, Harold. This is over." Harold stood there, speechless for a moment, as if the words hadn't sunk in yet. And then, with a sharp exhale, he lunged forward, grabbing my arm in a last-ditch effort to stop me. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I ripped my arm away from him and turned towards the door. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady, but with a finality that left no room for negotiation. "You'll regret this. I promise you." With that, I walked out, the door slamming behind me as I left him standing there, the sound of my heels fading into the night. But as I stepped into the cold air, I couldn't help but feel a surge of relief. I had finally done it. I had taken control. Now, Harold would have to face the consequences of his actions. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every thought, every memory, every word Harold had said to me in the past hours was a whirlwind in my mind. I couldn't escape the image of him standing there, stunned, as I walked out the door. I had done it. I had made the break. But now, as the adrenaline from the confrontation began to fade, the silence was deafening. The house, once a place I shared with him, now felt like a tomb. It wasn't just the furniture, the photos, the years of shared life. It was everything. It was the ghost of my marriage hanging in the air, a heavy weight pressing against my chest. I sat up in bed, staring out the window at the still, moonlit night. The town was quiet, unaware of the battle that had just taken place inside my home. My fingers absent-mindedly ran over the edge of the sheets. Harold's betrayal had broken the illusion that everything was fine, and now nothing seemed to make sense. For decades, I had lived my life believing we were partners, that we were in this together. But now I knew the truth. The truth was cold. The truth was unforgiving. Harold had never truly been mine. Not in the way I had believed. As the hours passed, I could hear the faint sound of his voice from downstairs. He was pacing, talking to himself, clearly trying to make sense of what had just happened. But there was no sense to it. There was no way to justify the cruelty, the manipulation. Not after everything I had done for him. I finally forced myself out of bed. I couldn't stay in the silence any longer. I needed to do something, anything, to take my mind off the wreckage of the past few days. I wandered to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of tea, the warmth of it soothing, but only slightly. The house seemed empty without his presence, and that should have been a relief. But it wasn't. A sudden thought hit me: what's next? I wasn't just leaving him. I was leaving the life I had known for the past 60 years. I had spent my youth taking care of him, making sacrifices, and now I had nothing to show for it except for the hollow echo of our broken home. I sat down at the kitchen table, the cup of tea trembling in my hands. I had to make a plan. I couldn't afford to wallow in the sadness of it all. I needed to take charge of my life, to take back what was mine. A noise from behind broke my train of thought. I turned, startled, only to see Harold standing in the doorway. He was disheveled, his face pale, as though he hadn't slept either. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something: fear? Regret? Or was it just desperation? "Margaret," he started, his voice hoarse. "Please just let me explain. You have to understand." I held up a hand, cutting him off. I couldn't listen to his excuses. I couldn't hear the lies anymore. "No, Harold," I said, my voice stronger than I had expected. "You've had your chance. You've made your choice, and now so have I." He stepped forward, his eyes pleading, but I didn't move. I didn't want him near me. Not now. Not after everything. "Margaret, I don't know what to say. Sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You have to know that. You have to believe me. Lila, she's just a mistake, just a..." His voice trailed off as he saw the look on my face. A mistake. A mistake. The words hit me like a slap across the face. "I don't want your apologies, Harold," I replied, my words sharp and final. "What you did to me wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And you chose her. You chose everything you wanted, and I'm not going to be part of that anymore." His face twisted in confusion. "But I love you, Margaret. You're my wife. We've been through so much together." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I've loved you for 60 years, Harold. I've stood by you, I've given you everything, and you chose to throw it away. You chose her. You chose this humiliation. And now it's time for me to walk away." He reached out, his hand trembling. "No, don't leave. Please. We can fix this. We can start over. Just give me a chance." I stepped back, shaking my head. "You don't get to fix this, Harold. Not anymore." I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and walked toward the door. Harold stood there, still, as if frozen in place. "Margaret, don't do this. Please." But I didn't look back. Couldn't. As I stepped out the door, the cool night air wrapped around me like a cloak, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. I didn't know what was ahead, but I knew it was time to find out. I had lived my whole life for someone else's happiness. Now it was time to live for my own. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't going back to him. I didn't have a destination in mind as I walked away from the house. The streets were quiet, the only sound being the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. I didn't know where I was going, but in that moment it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was free. Free from the suffocating grip of a marriage I had held together for so long, only to watch it fall apart in the blink of an eye. I kept walking, my feet taking me down familiar roads, but they no longer felt familiar. Everything around me seemed different, as though the world had shifted while I wasn't paying attention. I was alone now, and the weight of that truth was heavier than I expected. I wasn't just walking away from Harold, I was walking away from everything I had known. My life had been so intertwined with his that I didn't know who I was without him. The wind picked up, and I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, trying to push away the chill that seemed to be creeping under my skin. The darkness of the night felt like a blanket, wrapping around me, suffocating me with the silence. I hadn't made it far before I stopped at the edge of a park. The swings were swaying gently in the wind, and I found myself drawn to them. I hadn't been here in years, not since Emily was a little girl. This park used to be a place of comfort for me, a place where I could escape, where everything felt simple and safe. But now, even this place felt foreign. I sat down on one of the swings, pushing myself gently back and forth, my mind racing. What now? Asked myself. What do I do next? The questions were endless. Should I stay here in town? Should I leave? Where would I go? What would I do? I couldn't think straight. My mind was a blur of confusion, anger, and hurt. But most of all there was fear. I had spent my whole life building a life with Harold, and now everything was falling apart. What would people say? What would they think of me? My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking through the fog of my thoughts. I pulled it out, expecting another message from Harold, but instead it was from Emily. Mom, are you sure you're okay? I'm really worried about you. I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a lump form in my throat. I hadn't wanted to drag her into this, but now I had no choice. She was my daughter. She deserved to know the truth. I quickly typed a reply, my fingers trembling. I'm fine, sweetheart. I just need some time to think. Don't worry about me. I hit send, but even as I did, I knew it wasn't the truth. I wasn't fine. I was far from fine. I stayed at the park for a while longer, the minutes stretching into hours. My thoughts circled back to Harold and what had happened. I couldn't stop replaying the events of the night over and over again. His face when I handed him the t-shirt. The way his eyes shifted from surprise to anger. The look of defeat when I left him standing there, alone. But even as I thought about him, I couldn't bring myself to regret my decision. Leaving him had been the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew it was the right thing. I couldn't stay in a marriage where the trust had been shattered beyond repair. Finally, I stood up from the swing, my legs stiff from sitting too long. I needed to move. I needed to do something. Anything. I walked away from the park, my feet taking me in no particular direction. But as I walked, a sense of clarity began to settle over me. I had been living for him for too long, bending and twisting myself to fit into a life that wasn't mine. I had sacrificed everything, my time, my happiness, my peace of mind, all for him. And for what? For him to humiliate me in front of his friends. For him to choose someone else. Well, I wasn't going to be that woman anymore. The more I walked, the stronger my resolve became. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I wasn't going to let him take everything from me. I had my own life to live now. And I would live it for me. For the first time in years, I was going to put myself first. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But I would. I would rebuild my life, brick by brick, until I was whole again. I pulled my phone from my pocket again, glancing at the time. It was late, but I knew I had to make one more call. With trembling hands, I dialed the number. It rang for a few seconds before the familiar voice on the other end answered. Hello. Hi, Susan, I said softly. It's Margaret. There was a pause on the other end before she spoke again. Margaret. What's going on? Are you okay? I swallowed hard, the weight of everything pressing on my chest. I need your help. I could hear the concern in Susan's voice as she asked again. Margaret, what happened? What's going on? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I wasn't sure where to start, or even how to explain everything that had happened. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't carry the weight of this alone. I left Harold, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but in the silence of the night, it sounded like a declaration. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Susan's voice broke through, calm but steady. You left him. Margaret, are you sure? I could almost hear the disbelief in her words, but I didn't need her judgment right now. I just needed her support. Yes, I replied, my voice a little stronger this time. I'm done. He's been lying to me for months. I found out about her, about Lila, and I couldn't stay. I couldn't be his fool anymore. Susan's silence was more comforting than I expected. I could tell she was processing what I had just said, but she didn't rush to fill the void. When she finally spoke, her words were simple but filled with understanding. I'm glad you called me, Margaret, she said softly. I've been worried about you. I know you've been through a lot with him, but I'm proud of you for making this choice. You deserve better. I swallowed hard at the warmth in her words. It had been a long time since I felt like I deserved better. A long time since I remembered who I really was. Thank you, I murmured. I just don't know what to do next. I don't even know where to go. Susan was silent for a moment. I could hear her thinking. Then, with a quiet but firm voice, she said, You need to be somewhere safe. Somewhere that's just for you. You've been living for Harold, for everyone else for so long. It's time to put yourself first. Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. For the first time in ages, I realized just how much of my life I had given up for everyone else. I had been a wife, a mother, a caretaker. But I had forgotten what it was like to just be me. You're right, I said, the words coming more easily now. But where do I even start? There was a brief pause before Susan responded. I've got a place. It's small, but it's yours if you want it. You don't have to stay with Harold, Margaret. You can stay with me. Just for a while. I think it's time you took a break from everything and focused on you. I felt a surge of relief flood through me. Susan had always been a loyal friend, and she knew me better than anyone else. But this offer, this kindness, was more than I had expected. I don't know what to say, I whispered, the weight of the situation finally beginning to sink in. I can't even think straight. You don't have to, Margaret, Susan said, her voice gentle. Just come to me. Take a breath. Let everything else fall away for a while. I could feel my resolve strengthening as I heard the sincerity in her voice. I needed this. I needed to break free from the life that had held me captive for so long. I needed to be somewhere that didn't remind me of the pain, the betrayal. Okay, I said, my voice firm now. I'll come. I'll be there in the morning. You take your time. I'll be here when you're ready, she replied. We said our goodbyes and I hung up, the weight in my chest easing just a little. I wasn't sure what was next, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The first step had been made. I was leaving Harold, leaving the life that I had built with him. I was walking away from everything I thought I knew, and in doing so I was walking toward something new. As I stood there in the quiet darkness, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I was tired, physically, emotionally, mentally. But I couldn't afford to let myself collapse now. I gathered my things, the things I thought I couldn't live without, my purse, my phone, my coat, and made my way to the car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back at the house for what I knew would be the last time. It had been my home for so long, but now it felt like a stranger's house. A house that held too many memories, too many secrets, too many broken promises. As I drove toward Susan's, the headlights illuminating the dark road ahead of me, I couldn't help but wonder what life would look like on the other side of this moment. Would I be okay? Could I rebuild? I didn't have the answers. But as I glanced down at the small envelope I had tucked into my bag, the one that held the papers that would ensure my financial independence, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could start over. I wasn't as powerless as I had once believed. I had choices now. I had a future. And that future, for the first time in years, felt like it could be mine. The drive to Susan's house was longer than I expected. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and flashes of the life I had left behind. The streets blurred in front of me, but I didn't care. The only thing I could focus on was the possibility of a life without Harold, a life where I could finally breathe. I had spent so many years trying to keep him happy, so many years bending to his whims, that the idea of living for myself felt foreign. But now, as I drove into the quiet suburban neighborhood where Susan lived, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Her house was small, but it was a home, a place where I could escape, heal, and take the first step toward the life I had been denying myself for so long. As I parked in the driveway, I took a deep breath and stared at the front door. Susan had already texted me that she'd be waiting. I could see the light shining through the window, casting a warm glow in the darkness. I walked up the steps, the sound of my footsteps soft against the wood. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorbell, but I pressed it, and within moments, the door swung open. Susan stood there, her face a mix of concern and comfort. She embraced me immediately, and I felt my shoulders relax for the first time that night. She didn't need to say anything. I knew she understood. "I'm so glad you're here," she said softly, pulling me inside. "Come in. Get settled. We'll talk tomorrow. You've had a long night." I followed her into the cozy living room, where the familiar scent of vanilla and lavender hung in the air. It was a stark contrast to the cold, empty house I had left behind. I sank into the plush armchair, my body finally giving in to the exhaustion that had been building for days. "You must be exhausted," Susan said as she sat down across from me, her gaze gentle but filled with concern. "How are you feeling?" I stared at the floor for a moment before looking up at her. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared. I don't know what's next. Everything I thought I knew. It's all gone." Susan nodded, understanding the weight of my words. "I know. But you're not alone. You have me. And you're strong. You've always been strong." Her words were comforting, but they didn't ease the uncertainty I felt. I had spent decades with Harold, building a life that I now saw was built on lies and deception. How could I rebuild from nothing? Susan must have seen the doubt on my face because she quickly added, "It's okay to not have everything figured out right now. But you've made the first step. You walked away from something that was toxic. And that's huge, Margaret. You should be proud of yourself." I took a deep breath, letting her words settle into my mind. Maybe she was right. Walking away from Harold had been one of the hardest things I had ever done, but it was also the most important. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I wasn't going to let my past define my future. "I don't know if I can do this alone," I said quietly, the vulnerability creeping into my voice. "I've always had someone there. And now I don't know how to be on my own." Susan's eyes softened, and she moved closer to me. "Margaret, you're not alone. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. But this is your journey now. And I believe in you." I smiled faintly, grateful for her words, but still unsure of what was next. The road ahead felt uncertain, like a fog I couldn't see through. I didn't know what steps to take, where to go, or how to start over. "I'll figure it out," I said quietly, though the words didn't feel as certain as I wanted them to. "I'll take it one day at a time." Susan nodded, her hand resting on mine in silent support. "One day at a time," she echoed. "And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." For the first time in a long time I felt the faintest spark of hope. Maybe I didn't need to have it all figured out. Maybe all I needed to do was take the next step, no matter how small. The night passed quietly. Susan made me a cup of tea and we sat together talking about anything and everything. It was a welcome distraction from the storm that had raged inside me for so long. For the first time in ages, I allowed myself to laugh. A genuine, carefree laugh. And it felt good. Before I knew it, I was lying down in the guest room, the soft sheets enveloping me in a sense of comfort I hadn't known in years. As I closed my eyes, I thought about all the years I had spent holding my breath, waiting for something to change. But now, for the first time, I felt like I could finally exhale. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. And that was the first step. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. I woke up with a strange sense of peace, but also with the undeniable weight of what I had done. The decision to leave Harold wasn't just a simple choice. It was a turning point in my life, one that I had been avoiding for far too long. I stretched and sat up, rubbing my eyes as I took in the unfamiliar surroundings of Susan's guest room. The smell of coffee drifted up the stairs, reminding me that the world had not stopped turning despite the chaos of my own life. I stood up, slipping on the robe Susan had given me, and made my way downstairs. Susan was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee and reading a book. When she saw me, she smiled warmly, setting the book down and standing to greet me. "How'd you sleep?" she asked, her voice soft and caring. "Better than I expected," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I guess I needed the rest more than I realized." Susan motioned toward the table. "I made some breakfast. You can join me if you're hungry." I nodded gratefully, pulling out the chair and sitting down. As I took the first bite of the eggs she'd prepared, I couldn't help but let the simple act of eating in peace sink in. At Harold's, I'd often had to eat quickly or wait for him to finish talking before I could take a bite. It was strange to think that something so ordinary, sitting down for a meal, could feel so different. The quiet moments with Susan felt like a breath of fresh air, but underneath it all, I still couldn't escape the uncertainty that lingered in my mind. "What now?" I asked, my voice hesitant. "What do I do now?" Susan didn't hesitate. "Now, you take a step forward. You've made it through the hardest part, Margaret. You've walked away from the life that was holding you back. Now it's time to rediscover yourself. Figure out who you are without Harold. And remember, you don't have to do it alone." I nodded slowly, feeling a mix of emotions swell up inside me. She was right, of course. The hardest part was over. But the real challenge was just beginning. Starting over wasn't just about moving into a new house or even cutting ties with Harold. It was about rebuilding my identity, my confidence, and most of all, my trust in myself. "Thank you, Susan," I said quietly, my heart full of gratitude. "I don't think I would have made it through this without you." She smiled warmly. "You would have, Margaret. You're stronger than you realize. You just need to give yourself credit for it." After breakfast, we spent the morning talking. Susan helped me sort through my thoughts and my plans for the future. The one thing that stood out in all our discussions was the need for patience. I couldn't expect everything to fall into place right away. It would take time to heal. It would take time to adjust. Later in the day, we went out to run a few errands. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. We stopped by a local cafe for some coffee, and for the first time in ages, I found myself relaxing. The weight of Harold's presence was nowhere to be found. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The evening came quickly, and I found myself back at Susan's, curled up on the couch with a blanket, feeling more at ease than I had in months. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I glanced at the screen, expecting another message from Harold. But when I saw it was from Emily, my heart skipped a beat. "Mom, I don't know what's going on, but I need you to call me. Please. I'm really worried." I stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Emily had been so supportive of me, but I knew the truth would be hard for her to hear. I hadn't wanted to drag her into this mess, but now it seemed inevitable. I took a deep breath and dialed her number. It rang twice before she picked up. "Mom," she said, her voice filled with worry. "Where are you? I've been trying to reach you. What's going on with you and Dad?" I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. "Emily, honey, I don't know how to say this, but your father and well, we're not together anymore." There was a long pause on the other end, and then Emily spoke, her voice quiet but strained. "What do you mean? Did something happen?" I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my voice steady. He's been seeing someone else. I found out about it and I couldn't stay. I left him. For a moment there was silence. I could hear Emily's sharp inhale, as though she was processing what I had just said. Mom, I don't even know what to say, she whispered. I don't understand. How long has this been going on? Too long, I replied, my voice trembling now. I don't know what's real anymore, Emily. But I'm done. I'm walking away from it all. She didn't say anything for a long while, and I could feel her sadness through the phone. It broke my heart to know that she was hurting too. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice more composed. I'm here for you, Mom. Always. If you need me, I'm here. Tears welled in my eyes as I whispered, I love you, sweetheart. I love you too, Mom, she replied. I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. I had told her the truth, but I knew this wasn't the end of the conversation. There was more to come. There would be questions. There would be pain. But for now, I had done what I needed to do. I set the phone down and turned to Susan, who had been sitting quietly across from me, giving me space to have the conversation. She smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. You did the right thing, Margaret. It's going to be hard, but it's the first step toward healing. I nodded, feeling both the weight and the relief of the conversation. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't carrying the burden of my secrets alone. The next chapter of my life was beginning, and though I didn't know where it would take me, I was ready to face it head-on. The days that followed felt like a blur, but in the best possible way. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't living in the shadows of Harold's control. I wasn't walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate his moods or please him. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. But even as the weight lifted from my shoulders, the reality of what I had done began to sink in. I had left him. I had walked away from the man I thought I would grow old with, the man I had dedicated my life to. And while part of me felt liberated, another part of me, quiet, uncertain, wondered if I had made the right choice. I spent the next few days at Susan's house, adjusting to my new reality. Every morning, I woke up with a sense of freedom, but also with the gnawing feeling of the unknown. What would my life look like now? Would I ever feel whole again? But Susan was there, a constant presence of support and encouragement. She kept reminding me that this was my time to reclaim my life, to figure out who I was without Harold. You don't have to have all the answers now, she would tell me. Just take it one step at a time. It was good advice. And the more I followed it, the more I realized that I didn't need to know everything at once. I just needed to take one small step and then another. The pieces would come together eventually. The first step was finding work again. I had been out of the job market for years, and the thought of starting over in a new field was daunting. But Susan encouraged me to look into local opportunities. You've got a lot to offer, Margaret, she'd remind me. It's just a matter of finding the right fit. I didn't think I could just jump into anything too fast. I wasn't sure I had the energy to take on a full-time career right now. But maybe I could do something small. Maybe I could start with something that would reignite my passions, something that could give me purpose. One afternoon, while Susan was out running errands, I decided to visit the local community center. I'd volunteered there years ago, back when Emily was still in high school. It had been a place of comfort for me, a place where I could contribute, where I could connect with others in a meaningful way. As I walked through the familiar doors, the memories rushed back. The sound of laughter, the friendly faces, the sense of community. It felt like a piece of my past had returned. I walked up to the front desk, and the receptionist looked up with a warm smile. Hi there. How can I help you today? I used to volunteer here a few years ago, I said, my voice soft but steady. I was wondering if there were any opportunities for me to get involved again. Her eyes lit up. We'd love to have you back. We're always looking for volunteers. What kind of work are you interested in? I thought for a moment, then smiled. I've always enjoyed working with the elderly, helping them with things like paperwork or just being there to talk. I think I could help in that area. She nodded enthusiastically. That sounds perfect. Let me get you in touch with our coordinator. We'd love to have you back. I felt a sense of excitement stirring inside me. This was it. This was the first step toward rebuilding my life. It wasn't a giant leap, but it was a start. And it felt like the right place to begin. That evening, as I sat down with Susan and told her about the community center, she grinned from ear to ear. "I'm so proud of you, Margaret. I knew you had it in you." "I don't know if it's much, but it's something," I replied, my voice filled with both gratitude and uncertainty. Susan reached across the table, taking my hand. "It's more than enough. It's a huge step forward." That night, I went to bed with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in ages. Maybe Harold had been a part of my past, but he didn't have to define my future. I was starting to build something for myself again. And while it would take time, I was ready for the journey. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I started volunteering at the community center 2 days a week. I spent my days helping the elderly with tasks, listening to their stories, and sharing my own experiences with them. There was something deeply fulfilling about it. The work was meaningful, and it felt good to be appreciated, to be needed again. But there was still a lingering emptiness inside me. It wasn't just about the volunteer work or the new routine. I had to face the reality of the choices I had made. I had walked away from my marriage, from the life I had known, and now I had to find my footing in this new world. One afternoon, as I was sitting in the living room, staring out the window, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a text from Harold. "Margaret, please. I need to talk to you. Can't go on like this. Sorry. I made a huge mistake. Let's fix this. Please." My breath caught in my throat. I had known this moment would come, but I wasn't prepared for it. Harold was reaching out, trying to pull me back into the web of lies and regret. I stared at the message, torn. My mind told me to ignore it, to keep moving forward. But my heart still ached. What if he was truly sorry? What if I made a mistake? But as I looked around at the new life I was slowly building, at the community I was reconnecting with, at the small steps I had taken toward reclaiming myself, I knew the answer. I wasn't going back. Not to Harold. Not to that life. I put the phone down, turned away, and took a deep breath. I'd taken back my power. And nothing, not even his apologies, could take that from me. The days after Harold's text were harder than I'd expected. There was a constant tug-of-war in my heart, a battle between the life I had built with him and the new path I was carving for myself. I kept telling myself that I had made the right choice, that walking away had been the only way forward. But every so often a memory would surface, and I'd feel that old, familiar longing. A longing for the life I had once thought was secure, for the man I had once loved. But each time that longing crept in, I reminded myself of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the public humiliation. I was stronger than that. And I wasn't going to let it define me. Susan had been my rock through all of this. She was always there, a steady presence in my life, offering advice when I needed it and quiet support when I didn't. Her home had become a sanctuary, a place where I could begin to heal. I had continued my work at the community center, and slowly but surely, I felt a sense of purpose returning to my life. The people I worked with were kind, generous, and full of stories. Stories of their lives, of their joys and their struggles. It reminded me that life was still beautiful, even when it was hard. But there was still something missing. Something that I knew I needed to do for myself before I could truly move on. One morning, after a particularly long shift at the center, I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping a cup of tea when Susan walked in, her face bright with excitement. "I think it's time, don't you?" she said, her eyes twinkling. "You've been through so much, and now it's time for you to take the final step. Time to reclaim the life you deserve." I set my cup down, looking at her with confusion. "What do you mean?" "I'm talking about getting your own place, Margaret," Susan said, sitting down beside me. "You've been here long enough. You've got your feet under you now, and it's time to give yourself the freedom to spread your wings. You don't need to stay here anymore. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. And I know you can do it." My heart leaped in my chest. The thought of living on my own, of truly beginning again, had always seemed like a distant dream. But now, with Susan's encouragement, it suddenly felt possible. "You're right," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "It's time. Time to make this mine. Time to have my own space." Susan smiled warmly, her eyes full of pride. "I've seen you change, Margaret. I've watched you become strong again, step by step. You've earned this." That night I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with ideas, plans, and possibilities. I needed to find a place that was mine. A place that reflected who I was now, not who I had been. It couldn't be a place haunted by the past. It needed to be a blank slate, something I could fill with new memories, new experiences, and new hopes. The next day I started looking. I scoured listings online, called real estate agents, and began to get a sense of what I could afford. It wasn't easy. Starting over from nothing had its challenges, but I was determined. By the end of the week, I had found a small, cozy apartment in the heart of the city. It wasn't much, but it was perfect. It was light, airy, and it had everything I needed. It was a fresh start, and for the first time in ages I felt like I could truly breathe. As I signed the lease and made plans to move in, I realized that this was it, the final step. I wasn't just leaving Harold behind. I was leaving everything about that life behind. I was reclaiming myself, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of the woman I was becoming. The first night in my new apartment was a revelation. I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, the city lights twinkling through the window. It was quiet, it was peaceful, and it was mine. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes and allowing myself to soak it all in. I had done it. I had walked away from everything that held me back and stepped into the future, on my own terms. And then, for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to smile. It was a real smile, one filled with hope, with pride, and with the promise of the life I had yet to live. There were still challenges ahead. I still had my fears, my doubts, and the scars from the past. But for the first time I felt like I could face them. The weight of Harold's betrayal was no longer crushing me. I had risen above it. I had found my strength again. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And that, in itself, was enough.